we're finally here. Part 5 has been the looming shadow over this series that I've been talking about, because it has all this payoff for foreshadowing and build-up since easily Part 3. It's where things finally ramp up, because the usual flow in previous books was show a minor event happen, then the next has the implications with raised stakes. But that just goes right out the window in Part 5. Each book is a roller coaster of revelations with huge problems. What you're gonna get is every volume in this part feels like 2 in any other. So where are we picking up? Rosemine's starting her 3rd year in the academy with a lot on the line. She has to maintain appearances, talk up Ferdinand, avoid royalty, all while trying to keep her dorm together because there's a purge going on back home. There's a lot of moving parts, and with what we know about Rosemine, she's probably gonna make it worse. But before we go ahead and get on into that, why not hit the subscribe button? That way you can stay up to date on Bookworm content from me. I've also got merch for sale as always, and with the holidays coming up, you can use the promo code TRASHXmas for 10% off. Why not help me spread my garbage this holiday season? And with those obligatory plugs out of the way, let's go ahead and get into Part 5, Volume 1, Avatar of a Goddess. The prologue begins from Hildebrand's perspective. It's after his debut in spring for the Archduke Conference where things went pretty well. That is until his engagement is announced by the king to all the Obs. He knew about this ahead of time, but that doesn't mean he was pleased about it. In fact, he's pretty upset about being married off to a girl he's never met, losing his royal status, and he's basically gonna have to give up on his love for Rosemine. He's not even getting a say in his partner, and if he had to choose, he'd pick her hands down, obviously. And after returning to his chambers, he goes to his hidden room to sulk over his poor fortune. A few days later, he gets a meeting request from Raublut, and it turns out they're pretty close. Raublut has known him since birth, which means he can't really hide his sour mood from him. And to that end, he offers Hildebrand 2 things to hopefully brighten his mood. One is a toy of some sort that he often gives the prince to cheer him up, but the second is much more serious. He prefaces this with an order from the king. He's to get close to Rosemine and find out what she knows about the Forbidden Archive. Why? Because an Archduke candidate was snooping around the library, became the master of the tools there, and is very clearly investigating something with her guardian. Yeah, she's extremely suspicious to the royal family, but Hildebrand waves it off because he knows Rosemine more than Raublut. She just likes books. That's all. Too bad Raublut doubts that any noble would offer their mana out of the goodness of their heart, and is adamant that Ferdinand is scheming something, especially now that they're going to be separated. This is a good chance to see Rosemine's true motives, so they're going to put an archnoble in charge of the library to handle the tools. If Rosemine gives over ownership no problem, it'll show she has nothing to hide. This librarian is going to be a woman that can hopefully get close to Rosemine and get information out of her. But that's not all they're sending. Eglantine is going to replace the Archduke candidate course professor as well. That way she too can get close and get information out of Rosemine. And with those revelations, Raublut gives Hildebrand his last present. A small box with a message recorded for him that he tells him to listen to in his hidden room. Hildebrand assumes it's from his father, but Raublut just smiles instead. After he leaves, Hildebrand goes to listen reluctantly. However, inside his hidden room, he finds out it's not from his father, but Raublut himself. He tells him he knows that this engagement isn't what Hildebrand wants, but only a king can overturn the royal decree from another king. So in order to do that, he encourages Hildebrand to find the Gruchicite and become king himself. Now that would also happen to save his father, because his father really doesn't want the role of king. He's pretty much killing himself just trying to keep the country going. So now Hildebrand's torn on what to do because he was raised as a vassal. Yeah, kingship is pretty much beyond him, but he also has his own aspirations. And with that, he decides to ask his mother for advice. At a tea party later, he says there's something he wants, but he's not sure if he can get it, and it's probably selfish to even try. But his mother perks up rather than scolding him. Damn straight. Her boy does have some Dunkelfelger blood in him after all. Arthur interjects, saying he's a royal and not from Dunkelfelger, but Magdalena, his mother, silences him. She encourages Hildebrand to search out what he wants and fight for it their way. Hell, that's how she secured the future with the man she loved. So now Hildebrand is pumped, and when the Royal Academy term starts, he sees Rosemine at the Fellowship gathering, but something's standing out about her. Yeah, a certain hair stick catches his eye. Just the thought of Wilfried giving that to her pisses Hildebrand off, but he does keep his emotions contained, so there's some growth there. He silently makes a mental list of things he needs to do. First the Gruchicite, and now some rainbow face stones for Rosemine. So it's here we're finally getting our first hints of just how suspicious the Knights Commander is of Rosemine and Ferdinand. And yeah, understand that his suspicion is founded at this point, but It's also bordering on fanatical. This situation is already resolved, and he's still being on guard against Ferdinand. Why that is, though, is a fairly big plot point that's pretty integral to the whole climax of this story, so you're gonna have to wait. I'm not gonna spoil that far ahead. We don't see a ton of him, but as this plays out, we're gonna see more of what he's doing and also his connection to the Adelgeisa villa. Back to Rosemine's perspective, and we pick up with her in the Royal Academy right after Matthias informed her of Georgine being at his family's estate. Yeah, that's a huge nail in Gerlach's coffin, so Rosemine and Wilfried immediately write to Sylvester with Matthias's testimony. And when Charlotte arrives the next day bearing a letter, they go to a meeting room to discuss it privately. Basically, they were going to wait until the Lord of Winterhunt because they're going to be short on manpower after this purge. But this new info sped up their timeline, so now it's going to be carried out immediately. Well, they better call Matthias and Lorenz then to figure out how they're going to handle the former Veronica faction in the meantime, and they're pretty much on the same page as the Archduke candidates. They say they'll talk to the kids in their faction, figure out who's guilty by association, how far that's going to spread, and decide who's going to give their names to who. I mean, unless they'd rather die with their family, that's always a possibility. In which case, they can just be sent back to Ehrenfest to be purged. Turns out Matthias doesn't know of any children who are aware of his father's plan, since he was such a cautious man. But since they don't know the full extent of his scheme, who all is involved could lead to desperation. Kids could get suicidal and try to attack the Archduke candidates. Yeah, that would just lead to all the children in the former Veronica faction in the dorm being killed regardless. They need to prevent that from happening, so they say leave convincing the kids to them. Charlotte doesn't really like that since Sylvester tasked them with convincing the children, but Riarda steps in to offer some wisdom. Let Matthias and Lorenz help, so they can keep a safe distance from the children. They're venturing into new territory here, so they can't leave a single opening for criticism or attack. That makes sense. And when the first years arrive the next day, they gather everyone and explain what's happening back home, prefacing this by saying they're trying to save as many lives as possible. Rosemine stresses that acting out could cause even more deaths, and that perks Lorenz's interest. What does she mean? All of their little siblings are either in the playroom if they're baptized, or in the temple orphanage if they weren't. And she explains how Sylvester will allow them to be baptized if they can prove themselves, thus still becoming nobles. But in turn, the kids in the academy need to pave the path forward with their decisions. From there, the Veronica faction children go to a meeting room to discuss who they're going to give their names to, and Rosemine sends Roderick along to serve as an example and answer any questions. That's when attention turns to Theodore, who's taking up guard duty amongst all this chaos. Damn, he picked a bad time to serve Rosemine, am I right? Leonore puts him at ease, saying he just needs to focus on passing his classes, since Rosemine blasts through hers, and that doesn't really sound like what Judith told him. All of her stories were about classes and training, so he takes that to mean she's slow and not really great at her job. However, that's not the case at all. Judith is passing her classes at a fairly normal pace, but she's also achieving high marks. Marks that won't disgrace her as a med noble serving the archducal family. Hell, she even gets praise from Bonifatius for her marksman skills. Wow, who'd have thought his sister was so damn impressive? Judith gets done dirty in this story, always being portrayed as a crybaby and perpetually left behind, but understand, she's being measured up against giants here, Angelica, Cornelius, and Rosemine. When Roderick comes back, most of the kids have made their decision. Matthias, Lorenz, and Muriella plan to give their names to Rosemine, because their parents are sworn to Georgine and they know they're going to be executed. The two boys would rather swear their names sooner than later, that way they can serve as an example for the other kids. Of the other children, the majority of the boys want to serve Wilfried, the girls want to serve Charlotte, but the scholars all want to serve the off. But why the hell does no one want to serve Rosemine? Roderick makes the mistake of answering this question honestly, that she goes to the temple and Hartmut has a reputation for being strict. Then there's her poor health, which doesn't bode well for anyone who's a name sworn. But as Roderick accidentally trash talks his lady, Lieseletta blasts off a wash-in in his face, and Brunhilde drags him away to give him a thorough washing as well. So, did he have some dirt on his face? Well, no, he just got carried away. After he returns, he sums it up in nicer terms. If the others see how well she treats Matthias, Lorenz, and Muriella, it might just sway a few more. Though as it turns out, Muriella doesn't even want to serve Rosemine in particular. She actually wants to serve Elvira and write stories with her. Yeah, as it turns out, she's a devoted reader of all those romance stories. But since Elvira isn't on the table, Rosemine is a good second bet. She's involved in printing and is Elvira's daughter. Well, no reason to ruin that. Rosemine writes to Sylvester and asks if Muriella can give her name to Elvira. And hey, it's permitted, at least after her graduation. In the meantime, however, to make sure she doesn't get executed, she can give her name to Rosemine instead. I should probably mention that Elvira's whole romance stories thing is played as a gag and just an excuse for books until this point, but in part 5 it comes up in some pretty big ways, and right here is a good example of that. Elvira's love stories actually swayed somebody's allegiance. Lastly, there's the question about the 4th year attendant named Gresha. She wants to give her name to Rosemine for protection and some other reasons, however, there's some issues preventing that. Namely, Rosemine socializes with greater duchies, and that terrifies her, but Gresha is a med noble, and Brunhilde will be at the academy for 2 more years. In that last one, she's going to be training her sister to take over greater duchy socializing. That means Gresha can serve in Lisalette's place as a private attendant, keeping her chambers and schedule in order. And on that front, she's already got Lisaletta and Brunhilde's approval, because she's pretty good at it. So she has Roderick pass on that info, and they prep for the advancement ceremony the next day. Before that though, Berger kicks down the door and wonders why, for 2 years in a row now, they didn't inform her of their arrival. Okay, they have a good excuse this time, but they also probably shouldn't tell her. Hell, Ursher even notes the thick tension this winter, but Rosemine asks her to join them for dinner and they chat. She's up to date on Ferdinand's circumstances, but Ursher gives Rosemine a slight warning about her well-being and to take care of herself. That's weird, since she's been pretty healthy since her second Jarive, but that wasn't what Ursher was speaking about. She can tell that even the Saint of Ehrenfest is feeling down, and not to lose sight of who she really is. So for her sake, she hopes whatever is happening in Ehrenfest is resolved soon. Before they can go to the advancement ceremony the next day, Rosemine confirms their cover story for her new hairstick, that Ferdinand designed it, Wilfried gifted it to her, and all of her guardians offered the charms. That way, it doesn't look too bad for Wilfried. And bonus, Ferdinand's taste won't be called into question by Detlin's abomination. Also, it won't spark rumors about him giving her a lesser face stone for their engagement compared to Rosemine's. But Wilfried says it's pretty common for Ferdinand to worry, since hell, he even gave Wilfried and Charlotte charms as well. Sylvester got some too. But just then a commotion breaks out, and Lorenz is seen restraining a boy in bands of light. Turns out he was planning to pass a letter off to an acquaintance of his from Arnsbach to slip back to Ehrenfest. And because of this incident, Lorenz and Matthias have decided that no kids from their faction will attend the advancement ceremony. Rosemine reads the letter, and it's pretty damn sad how the kid is begging to know if his family's alright, but the Archduke candidates can't help here. Why? Because it wouldn't be fair, and they've already agreed to turn a blind eye if something like this happened. This is behavior that could have gotten that kid executed with his family, so if they acknowledge it, they kind of have to kill him. So with that, they head out to the advancement ceremony, and it goes about as expected. But when it's time for the fellowship gathering, Rosemine feels sort of annoyed, since Hildebrand looks kinda happy about their reunion. The reason is she can't be as happy as him with everything going on. You know, having only lost Ferdinand about a week prior, and also the purge back home. He hopes to spend time with her in the library, but that's probably not gonna happen this year. She's gonna be avoiding royalty as much as possible, per her guardians. Good fucking luck. We all know this story by this point, so that's not happening. And hell, it's only gonna ramp up from here. If only she listened to Sylvester and Ferdinand back in her first year. But the big takeaways from this gathering are the usual suspects. Dunkelfelger is up first because, well, they're besties at this point. They bring up the topic of the hairpin they need to deliver to Lestalot, and Rosemine was surprised by the illustration and design. Yeah, that was actually all Lestalot, surprisingly enough. Turns out the dude is actually a skilled artist. He points out how nice Rosemine's hair stick looks and asks her to spin so he can see it all, but Hannelore stops them because that would be pretty embarrassing. Mostly for Rosemine, mind you. But that doesn't stop his rampage, because he's very interested in Ehrenfest this year, and is looking forward to seeing the first volume of their history book at their book exchange tea party. Wait, he's coming? Yeah, because he's gonna be the next Aub and is low-key excited about that book. After that, they greet Juanchel, where Wilfried renews his rivalry with Ortwind. And then it's over to everyone's favorite, Arnsbach, where Detlind is pretty damn cocky this year. She brags about how much Ferdinand dotes on her, how he's doing all this administrative work for her sake so she can attend the academy, and how he wrote a love song to debut for her at their winter feast. Wow, that doesn't sound like Ferdinand or the song she gave him to play. But pointing that out also wouldn't serve much of a purpose and, in fact, would actually hurt Ferdinand's position in Arnsbach. And from there, the fellowship gathering proceeds as expected. On the way back to the dorm, they're ambushed by Raimund wanting to show Rosemine something from Ferdinand, and that triggers her guard knights because he appeared pretty suddenly. But after he explains, he shows her a slightly smaller sound recording magic tool with a message from the man himself. Ferdinand explains through this tool that he has high hopes for her, that not just she, but all of Ehrenfest should pass their classes on the first day, because if they don't, they're going to be a laughingstock for failing to maintain their grades and speed without Ferdinand in their duchy, and it'll also reflect pretty poorly on him. Yeah, now she's stressed, because they were so preoccupied with this purge, they haven't studied at all. But he puts her at ease with some wordplay, saying she just has to obtain the same grades, not better ones, failing to realize until it's pointed out to her that she's already achieved perfect marks on the first day and literally can't do better than last year. Well, crap. So she races back to the dorm and rallies everyone to pass their classes on the first day, because otherwise Ferdinand's gonna be mad. Though it's worth noting, despite all this pressure, she has a genuine smile on her face for the first time in a long while. As an aside, Raimun's sound recorder here is deemed a failure because Ferdinand says it can still be made smaller. So that's his next big goal, and Rosemine's too by extension, since this is also her project. Inside the dorm, Rosemine gets all the kids moving, but the former Veronica faction is more confused by this sudden drive to study, but even that quickly turns to anger, because the Archduke is killing their parents right now. Yeah, that's a downer, but as Rosemine's sitting there feeling bad, Leonore's fed up with this crap. She whips out her stop and binds the boy who spoke up with bands of light. And that's when she launches into her speech. Now, Rosemine was attacked twice by members of the former Veronica faction, spent 2 years in a fucking coma, and is still trying to save their ungrateful asses. If they're this displeased with all that sacrifice, they can go home and get killed with the rest of their families, because all of the lies gangs in her service want to follow the tradition of guilt by association. Alright, Rosemine's retainers are made up almost exclusively of people who hate these kids. Shit, Brunhilde steps in, but not to stop Leonore, just to inform her that she's making an error, because bands of light can't pass through the teleporter. Lieseletta then steps in and binds the kid with rope, stating that as an attendant, it's her duty to remove threats to her lady's mental health, especially since Rosemine looked so lively just a second ago after hearing Ferdinand's voice, getting motivated to study. And that's when Alexis and Natalie, Wilfried and Charlotte's guard knights step forward too, and back Leonore and Brunhilde up. Wilfried broke into the ivory tower and had his reputation stained all because of prodding by the former Veronica faction, and Charlotte still deals with the guilt of being kidnapped at her baptism and getting Rosemine poisoned. Yeah, there's zero sympathy for these kids among the retainers. Charlotte finally speaks up, but just to put all this in perspective, while the kids don't want their families killed, they still committed crimes. Rosemine then adds that they'll need good grades to redeem themselves should their families actually be killed, and education will be what they need to move up in life without backing. Essentially, it's going to help them prove themselves, and even if their families are fine, can they really face them with poor grades afterwards? But Matthias protests and says he's against the kids even leaving the dorm for class. If they're gonna blab, don't let them out, right? And that's a valid point, until Wilfried says it's not a problem. Word just arrived that the purge is over. Punishments will be doled out later, but even if information is leaked, it won't matter now. So with that, the kids get to studying. Even the one bound on the ground begs to study, because he knows his parents are innocent, so they cut him loose, and he gets to it. Yeah, this feels kind of anticlimactic since last volume built towards this whole thing, but understand. The actual event of the purge isn't that big of a deal. It's the consequences of it. This is going to create massive repercussions for not just Rosemine, or hell, even the duchy as a whole, but probably the whole country. We're getting a ton of new names sworn out of this, a power vacuum back home in Ehrenfest, and redacted for spoilers. Hell, I think what's the most impressive is this won't even be super relevant until after Volume 3. And on the first day, it's passing marks for everyone from Ehrenfest. Hell, the third years did so with perfect scores. So yeah, Rosemine's pretty damn pumped. But as she relishes in their shared victory with her retainers, an ordinance comes from Solange. Turns out there's a new arch-noble librarian in town, and they'd like her to pass over ownership of Schwartz and Weiss. Well, she has time after lunch, so why not? She replies and they head out after their meal, though Theodore wishes to come, but he can't. The reason why is he hasn't been registered with the library yet, so he can't enter, which means she'll just have to schedule the first year's registration while she's there. On the way there, Lieseletta's kinda sad because she prepared new outfits for Schwartz and Weiss. Remember, it's just the jacket and apron that contain the magic circles, the rest of the outfits can be changed out. But if there's a new librarian who's gonna take ownership, that means her clothes are just gonna go to waste. Yeah, that's a damn shame. However, on the bright side, it takes a while to make clothes, so they can probably wear them for the rest of the year. Inside Solange's office, there's quite the crowd. Not just the new librarian, but Hildebrand and Eglantine as well, sporting her new black cape. Yeah, she's clearly royalty now, and with all these retainers, it's pretty packed inside that tiny office. But since this is a handover of a royal heirloom, they're using that as the excuse for a royal to oversee this process. That didn't happen because she took ownership with a blessing, but in hindsight, yeah, that's super weird to her now. But as Eglantine chats her up, she reveals she's the new professor of the Archduke candidate course. Wow. Truth is stranger than fiction, because that's a hell of a love story plot right there. And that's when Eglantine introduces Rosamine to Hortensia, the new librarian. She's also originally from Klausenberg, and she and Eglantine go way back, apparently. After their introduction and greeting, Hortensia asks if Rosamine will allow her to take ownership. The room gets oddly tense, but Rosamine doesn't really see why. Alright, isn't being master of these tools supposed to be an honor or something? Well, we know the answer is the audience, but Rosamine doesn't see the ulterior motives just yet. So she grants Hortensia permission to touch, and really the process is simple. She just needs to supply enough mana to surpass Rosamine's in their face stones, which in practice means Rosamine probably shouldn't visit the library. That's when Solange returns Rosamine's face stone from between her second and third year, and that surprises everyone that she gave out such a large face stone. And to her, it's pretty obvious why. She did it to help Solange in the library. But if she can't come, how will she read? Hildebrand is shocked to hear her say that she won't come because she needs to research magic tools on top of finishing her 2 courses this year. So basically, she plans to not really see him. That's a shame, he was looking forward to it. But Solange gets it, because Rosamine is researching how to make magic tools as efficient as possible, right? And yeah, she is, but Solange has an archnoble to help out now. Why is she still taking interest in that research? That should fix their mana needs, right? Well, remember, the library was built to run off 3 archnobles, so having 1 helps, but they're still short too. More efficient magic tools will make the job easier. With that, she schedules Ehrenfest registration for the library and brings up their future Bookworm tea party. That piques Hortensia's interest, and she's quite the bookworm herself. Hell yeah. But Hildebrand interjects, saying he wants to come too. And that's when Eglantine steps in and scolds him. She's high enough status to actually do that now, saying a royal can't act that way since it's seen as an order. Yeah, he still doesn't understand how much authority he wields. But hey, that works out. She was told to avoid royalty anyway. Eglantine just saved her ass, right? Well, no. She's not going to let her off the hook entirely, and suggests they have a tea party after her classes are finished for old time's sake. However, Rosamine's too enamored with Eglantine to realize that she's a royal now too, one she should be avoiding as well. As she tries to leave the library, Schwartz and Weiss stop her and tell her to pray to Gramps again, but she tells them that Hortensia is their master now. They need to bug her now for their mana needs. This question of who the hell is Gramps has been on our mind since Volume 6 of Part 4, and we're still not going to get the answers until after the halfway point of Part 5. But the point here is, keep an eye on Schwartz and Weiss. We're going to see why they really exist. So yeah, this is some more of that long-haul foreshadowing that we love. With that, it's time for Rosamine's first practical lesson of her 3rd year, and this one's a pretty big deal. It's time for Rosamine to get her divine protections. Now, the 3rd year written class she had that day was about the gods. So before they can do this practical, they need to memorize all the gods' names. That wasn't really a problem for her, or the others in Ehrenfest for that matter, so they could all move on to their practical exam. But what's interesting to note is Felina and Roderick are actually there as well, because for once, this is a practical exam taken as a group regardless of status. Meaning they were told by Hartmut to record all of her divine protections for him. In class, Rosamine approaches her bestie Hannelore, and they chat a bit about how hard it was to memorize all the gods' names. But even Rosamine struggled when she first became the High Bishop. That strikes Hannelore as harsh, since she was put in charge of the temple right after her baptism. Pretty sad, right? But Rosamine takes this chance to try and clear up Sylvester's name. The temple is nice and clean, her siblings help out with the ceremonies, the odd visits, even Ferdinand was reluctant to leave when he married out of Ehrenfest. That's confusing, but Felina backs her up. Though this does actually bring up some important business for Hannelore. Rosamine needs to give Hartmut's letter to Clarissa since he's the high priest now, and Hannelore says she'll inform her that Rosamine wishes to speak to her. After that, Rosamine goes over the gods' names again with Felina and Roderick, telling them to take this seriously, since this is their one chance to gain new elements. Plus, protections also reduce the mana cost for spells, especially those of an element you have. But Wilfried's pretty skeptical. Sure, their textbooks say you can gain a new element through divine protections, but no one's actually done it. Then again, if it's in their lessons, it must be true, right? Though on the opposite side of that, Rosemine does know someone who failed to get a protection for an element they have. Remember how Angelica failed to get a protection for an element she had? Ready to hear why? Because the answer is very Angelica. Hersher overhears this and explains the reason why Angelica failed to get her divine protections was she actually failed to remember the gods' names during the ritual. Wait, really? She literally did the ritual after passing the class to remember the gods' names. Hell, this was one of her major makeup classes too. But then again, this is Angelica. As soon as she was done with the class, she probably forgot the names immediately. Though Hersher speculates it probably happened because the gods refused to give their protections to those who can't even remember their names. So, the odds of it happening again are pretty much non-existent. So if Felina put at ease that she won't fail, they begin their class proper. And it's kind of a joke. They just need to memorize a prayer and perform a ritual. That's it. So Hersher projects the prayer for the kids to memorize on a cloth, and Rosemine's ready right away. That shocks everyone, but she says it's basically the mana replenishment prayer they use, just with all the subordinate gods as well. Yeah, Wilfried sees that connection, but he doesn't think it's simple at all. But wait, the other Archduke candidates are even more confused, because as it turns out, they don't pray when they offer mana to the Foundation. That's when Hersher puts a stop to this discussion and pushes Rosemine along. That way they can wrap this up. She definitely doesn't have an ulterior motive and just wants to see something amazing. She guides her to a shrine where there's a carpet laid out with a magic circle embroidered on it. Just looking at it, she already knows what she has to do, so she kneels while reciting the prayer. As she says the names of the gods and fills it with mana, the whole circle lights up with all the elements, shooting pillars of light above her head, and a ton of the gods' names give reactions. When she finishes, her mana shoots into the carpet, and then up to the statues on the shrine. That's when the statues begin to spin and dance, which clears a pathway to the top of the altar. Hersher guides her up the stairway into a door that's much like the one to the mana replenishment room back in Ehrenfest, because this happened with Ferdinand when he did his ritual too. So Hersher is pretty excited to find some things out, and when she steps inside, she finds herself back at the ivory tree where she found her divine will in her first year. Really? That long snaking path had a shortcut this whole time? Damn, too bad there's nothing there for her now. So she turns around to leave, but she sees the ritual circle still lit up. Now she's wondering if she could reproduce this ritual back in Ehrenfest. Hey, maybe even Angelica could finally get some divine protections. So she busts out her diptych and sketches the circle as best she can before heading back down to Hersher. There she pesters Rosemine about what she saw up there, since Ferdinand didn't tell her when he did his. And that's kind of a red flag, so she decides it's best to keep that information to herself for now. At least until she asks Ferdinand about it. For reference, when Ferdinand did this ritual, it was before he got his stop. That means he went and got his stop right after, which probably would have been right up these stairs and through this portal. We don't know what that ivory tree is yet at this point in the story, but this is its second appearance. I want to draw attention to how it appeared. This ritual was originally done after graduation, and then somebody would go get their stop right after. So those who prayed sincerely and filled the entire circle would be welcome to the distant heights, where they would find that ivory tree and a high-quality divine will sitting at the base. Keep that information in the back of your head as the rest of this part plays out, specifically volume 3, 5, and 7. It'll all make sense after those. After disappointing Hersher, Rosemine returns to her retainers, and they ask which gods granted their protections. She doesn't really want to say she got over 40, but gets Roderick and Felina back to studying, while reviewing the material for her future classes. Wilfried is up next, feeling pretty confident, and when he comes back, turns out he got 12 divine protections himself. That causes a stir to run through the auditorium. Yeah, that's a ton apparently. We learned that most people only usually get protections from the primary gods of the elements they possess. Unless they're from Dunkelfelger, that is. Yeah, they get the war gods fairly frequently for some unknown reason. Sure, we won't discover that next book. So people who get protections from subordinate gods are fairly rare. After Ortwin goes up, he gets protections from only his element, but Hannelore secured some strange protections herself, but also Angrief, the god of war, and Dragonua, the goddess of time. That's to be expected if you read the Royal Academy stories, but she's otherwise confused and just takes her leave. After all the archnobles clear out, Felina goes before Roderick and secures a new element entirely. Yeah, she's stoked when she realizes she got a divine protection from Mesty and Nora. Hell yeah. But Gundalf inserts himself pretty quick to barrage her with questions. This is apparently unheard of. One doesn't usually get a new element from a subordinate god without the primary god as well. On top of a lay noble doing this of all people, so he's super interested in the type of work Felina has been doing. And it's not really much. People from Juanchal have been doing it too. so she's not really special in that department. When Roderick comes back though, that pretty much changes everything. He obtained protections from every element. What the hell? He had like 2 elements back in his first year. Remember him complaining to Felina about it? Well, that's insane. Gundalf probes him too. But Rosemine says this is something to celebrate. Is it not? So just leave the poor kid alone. As far as she's concerned, they both followed her advice and filled the magic circle to obtain these protections, assuming most other med and lay nobles don't actually fill the whole circle. That's why they fail to get protections. At least that's Rosemine's hypothesis. But Hersher says not to gloss over this like it's not something groundbreaking. If word got out about some med noble becoming omni-elemental through protections alone, chaos would pretty much erupt in the Royal Academy. So she has the 3 remaining students and Gundalf keep quiet until they can talk about it more the next day over dinner. The moniker for the parts tends to come up fairly early on. Part 1, Rosemine started off as the daughter of a soldier. She was an apprentice shrine maiden before Part 2 began, same with Part 3. Part 4 comes up in the first volume, but Part 5, we still don't know what goddess she's supposed to be an avatar of. Well, since it's such a massive step up, it's gonna take some groundwork. That's what we're in the middle of doing, with all these divine protections and such. So our answer's gonna come in the next one, to see what goddess she's supposedly an avatar of. The next day, written lessons are a breeze as everyone passes, but the practical is music, and that's a challenge. Not because of how hard it is, but for a different reason entirely. She takes a seat and starts to practice, but an Arnsbach archnoble nearby catches her ear. Yeah, she's playing the song that she gave Ferdinand before he left, but as she's enjoying it, the archnoble gets a smug look on her face and says it's an Arnsbach song and not an Ehrenfest one, and hints that she shouldn't try to claim it. Okay, she wasn't going to, and that seems to satisfy her. But as this girl continues to play for practice, Rosemine realizes that while this is a song about Geduld, it's not a love song like most of the ones about her are. It's actually a wistful song about one's hometown. Well, she'd better not ruin that for the Arnsbach kid, or else it could reflect poorly on Ferdinand back home. However, Wilfried notices the fact it's Rosemine's song, and starts to point it out, but she stops him just in time. And that's when the Arnsbach girl taunts her and asks if she can even play a new song without Ferdinand there. Since, again, they assume Ferdinand was the one pulling her strings, and they now have the source of Ehrenfest's recent cultural innovations. So she decides to stick it to this girl and goes to be graded, whereupon as she starts to play, a massive blessing fires out. She literally can't stop it either, and she's forced to sit there and play her song while blessing the whole room, because her mana is too hard to control after getting over 40 divine protections. This is a big problem. Everyone's shocked at the sight and she tries to brush it off, but no dice. That Saint legend of hers is only going to keep growing from here on out. After passing, she races back to the dorm for advice, but Riarda doesn't have any to give. People in her generation, or even Ferdinand's for that matter, got their stop after the ritual, so their mana was always easier to control. Well, guess she's stuck asking Hersher for advice when she arrives, and when she does, they have a private room prepared after their meal, since their discussion is likely going to be full of sensitive topics. Rosemine tries to tell her about her mana control issues after her ritual, but Hersher couldn't really care less. Ask Ferdinand, since she groups the 2 of them together as monsters. As for the 2 retainers in question that are causing this headache and subsequent meeting, as it turns out, not a single non-fighting centered subordinate god has given out a divine protection in over a decade. Yeah, Dunkelfelger gets the fighting gods, but they aren't really sure why. However, Wilfried got several subordinate gods in his ritual, and that's why he got some surprise, but Felina and Roderick are challenging the norm. Felina didn't get Shutsari's protection, just Mestianora's, and that's pretty much unheard of. And then Roderick's case is so extreme, it pretty much defies logic. I mean, Rosemine's is absurd beyond logic too, but it's also not her first time breaking conventional wisdom, so Hersher just wants to ignore it. Rosemine and Wilfried don't want her to gloss over that problem though, but Hersher says she can't really be bothered to deal with that headache right now, so she's not. What she is interested in though is the common thread between these extraordinary cases. One no one seems to notice. Yeah, Rosemine's the common denominator here, because her retainers got new elements, and her fiancé got subordinate gods in spades. Yeah, but why though? Now it's Rosemine's turn to point out the obvious. It's literally in their textbooks, but praying sincerely and offering mana forges a connection to the gods. That's how you get their divine protections, right? It's kinda concerning how lacking in critical thinking skills most nobles are. They're literally called divine protections, the gods have an association with elements and mana, so how do you not link that to prayer? Well, Hersher goes on to say that they misunderstood the text, and they thought it was just about the ritual, not applying this to their everyday lives. And that's not a criticism against this book, That's world building, showing how actively ignorant nobles are about religion that they don't make that connection. So Rosemine, Wilfried, and Felina receive protections from the gods they pray to. Hersher makes plans to contact those in Dunkelfelger and see if they pray to the war gods frequently to obtain their divine protections to solidify their hypothesis. That prayer works to get protections and helps with mana. But what about Roderick here? Well, he has an idea, but it's not really safe to talk about with Hersher yet. He needs to ask Sylvester first, and that segues into what the hell is going on in Ehrenfest, as Hersher is still in the dark about all that. They're also not telling her why Sylvester is busy back home, but she says that she wants to meet with him when he has time. Why? Well, think about it. Rosemine has introduced a new mana compression method helping their duchy, rediscovering a possible connection between prayer and divine protections that makes mana use more efficient, and only their duchy is going to benefit from all these discoveries? Yeah, no. So she poses the question, how do they think other duchies look upon Ehrenfest right now? And they kinda got their answer at the Archduke conference, but few view them favorably. Due to their grades, mana, and trends, on top of breaking into the upper ranks as a duchy, they're essentially looked at as opportunists, plus Sylvester's poor reputation. So yeah, it's not good. If they decide to monopolize this divine protection business with their mana compression method, the sovereignty is gonna start taking notice, because they're the ones hurting the most from the mana shortage. Hersher gives us a very complete picture now that the quiet part's said out loud. This has been subtext for a while, but now it's just plain text. Ehrenfest is a thorn in a lot of sides right now, and the fact that they're ignorant to that is pretty much an insult on top of it. If they keep going as they're going, they're gonna be enemies to everyone. It's time to start acting like an upper-ranked duchy. Hersher explains that the sovereignty assumed that Ferdinand was the one pulling the strings behind her sainthood, and they're still eager to find out what she knows. For that reason, Eglantine was placed as the Archduke Candidate Course Professor to pump her for information. And Hortensia, she's the Sovereign Knight Commander's first wife. She was already suspicious of Rosemine. The kid games in the academy are over, because everyone is interested in seeing what the Saint of Ehrenfest knows. After Hersher leaves, Rosemine gives Roderick a sound blocking magic tool. She wants to hear his theory on why he's omni-elemental now, and he suspects it's because he's name sworn to her, as she's omni-elemental herself. Now you would think this would impact those names sworn to Georgine and Ferdinand too, right? But their names are given after their rituals, so basically this only impacted Roderick because he was so young, and it's his opinion not to publicize this information. He gave his name because he wanted to serve her above all else. That's kind of the point of giving your name, to show absolute loyalty. If word got out that name swearing impacted mana elements, then it could change the idea of name swearing entirely. With so many kids about to be forced to give theirs, it could cause a frenzy, and the kids of the former Veronica faction would draw even more ire back home. Okay, so this was a very subtle bombshell that was just dropped. Roderick's big concern is this could change the reason people swear their names in the first place. As this part goes on, that becomes a very real concern. Hell, it's kind of already happening. Keep your eye on the new name-sworn children as they appear, and bear in mind just how far they've strayed from its original purpose. Before long, it's time for the Archduke Candidate course, and Rosemine learns that the Central Building is actually the specialty course for it. They have a small classroom tucked away in the back corner. Now no retainers can actually enter that room, so Rosemine and Wilfried have to enter by themselves. And inside, there's a desk with a step stool set up for Rosemine right by the front, next to her bestie Hannah-Laura. So she takes her spot and chats her up, asking if Hersher talked to her about her protections, and it turns out she did. Hannah-Laura felt a lot more at ease, realizing it was because of the charm she carries to the goddess of time, and how often she prays to her for her divine protection. And hey, it worked, because she actually got it. As for Angreif, well, Dunkelfelger culture praises the art of war, and they dance and do a ritual before and after dinner matches. That was most likely the cause there. It also explains why Dunkelfelger knights receive the divine protections so much more frequently than other knights. Ralphin incorporated this into the knight's course, and those who took it seriously seemed to get the protections, while those who just went through the motions because they were told to, didn't. Wilfried notes that it was a pretty good idea for their Archduke candidates to travel to Duchy for spring prayer then, so since Rosemine is having trouble controlling her mana and is the High Bishop, Hannah-Laura wants to know, just how many did she get? Yeah, it's still a secret, which Hannah-Laura takes to mean she got so many that she can't even say. And that's not wrong. That's when Eglantine enters, has some servants put the box gardens down, and then take their leave. Again, this is a pretty secretive class, and the reason why is revealed later this volume, but understand that literal lives are on the line here. Secrecy has to be maintained. She explains that these boxes are their duchy, and there's a miniature foundation tool in it. They're gonna learn how to manipulate it over the course of this class. And their very first job? Dye the foundation. Rosemine does so, but it goes beyond what she expected. She didn't just dye the foundational tool practically instantly, she also turned the barren sand inside into mana-rich earth, something that's already starting to sprout greenery. Well damn, that was basically their whole lesson for the day, so next time Eglantine will teach her the names of the god of darkness and goddess of light. In the meantime though, she can make some gold dust. She'll need that for Entwinkeln, which is pretty cool, because Ferdinand didn't actually teach her their names. Any Entwinkeln cast without their names crumbles within minutes. Turns out, their names are pretty important for Archduke candidate magic. She spends the rest of class making gold dust, and accidentally weirds out Hannelore with her insane mana. There's no way to stop the number of crises this year, is there? Well, back in the dorm, their practical lesson that afternoon is whirling, so Charlotte's pretty excited she gets to join Rosemine, but there is a bit of a problem. Remember that whirling is a form of prayer as well, and she doesn't think she can contain her mana for it. Hell, she used a ton of mana during the Archduke class and it barely feels like she used any at all. On top of following Hersher's one piece of advice to use mana and filling their gathering spot like she did after the Turnesby Fallen attack last year. She's still overflowing despite all that, so now it's all hands on deck. She sends an emergency request to Ehrenfest asking for any and all empty face stones to fill. That way she doesn't explode in a blessing bomb. Judith asks her to possibly fill hers too, and Rosemine extends that offer to anyone in the dorm. So that causes a rush where everyone presents their face stones, but she warns that the smaller ones could end up turned into gold dust if they're not careful, though some of the scholars actually take her up on that offer. Riard isn't pleased that she's just giving her mana out like this, but desperate times call for desperate measures, right? Anyway, after that and the stones from Ehrenfest are filled, she's still not sure she can contain her mana. That's when they load her up with charms and the face stone necklace that Ferdinand gave her last year to absorb as much as possible. That's honestly about the best they can do. If she looks like she's about to give a blessing, Charlotte and Wilfried will just have to haul her out of class. In the class itself, there's the real test whether she creeped out Hannelore enough for her to not be her friend anymore, but Hannelore waves and smiles, so clearly they're still cool, right? And when she finally approaches, Lestalot follows to ask when she's holding their joint tea party. He wants to see the hairpin as soon as possible, because depending on the quality, he may need to order a replacement. He sounds like he's being his usual douchey self here, but Hannelore comments that he's just excited to see the final product. Yeah, he's a bit tsundere. Rosemine has her scholar courses to take, so maybe they can check back in 10 days to see if their schedules line up. So yeah, they're not gonna hold it anytime soon. Lestalot's not pleased to hear it. But then again, he also doesn't really have much of a choice, does he? Enter Detlin to say she also ordered a hairpin from Ehrenfest because her husband-to-be is from there. Well, better clear up the question of Ferdinand's taste before Detlin's abomination ruins it at her graduation. Here, Rosemine skillfully gets Detlin to admit that she designed her own hairpin, and Detlin hangs herself with that rope. Yeah, poor Lestalot. He has to dance with this idiot at the graduation, and he's not super happy about hearing that she's gonna wear 6 hairpins and make herself look like an idiot. But at least Rosemine got what she wanted out of this. When it's time to practice, Eglantine enters to do a demonstration, and Rosemine is super stoked to see her whirl again. But Detlin makes a comment about it being poor form to whirl after she's graduated. Why? Well, probably because Detlin is slated to play the Goddess of Light this year, and she's pissed about sharing the spotlight for even a second, and who really wants to be compared to Eglantine's whirling? Though this was Charlotte's first time seeing it, and she was quite taken. Now it's time for the students to practice. Eglantine says she has high hopes to see how much Rosemine's improved in the last year, but all Rosemine can focus on is not giving a blessing. As they start, she feels her mana already beginning to leak out, so she focuses super hard on keeping it contained. Her body's burning up and she's sweating a ton, but as the whirl ends, she's just super happy she didn't fire out a massive blessing. Too bad she still drew a ton of attention to herself because all eyes are on her. Great. Every single face stone on her body is glowing, and the class is stunned into silence. Wilfried and Charlotte snap out of it enough to drag her out the door, after she gets confirmation that she passed the class. Riarda takes her back to the dorm where a second batch of face stones from Ehrenfest is waiting, along with a letter. Sylvester has set a date for his meeting with Hersher. If her first and second year made her saint legend look like propaganda, her third year turns it into the genuine article. She's obtained a large number of divine protections, fired off a massive blessing just playing an instrument, and now she's glowing just whirling. All of these were done in front of archnobles or archduke candidates, so word's gonna spread. And this is all the groundwork for the disasters to come. When Charlotte and Wilfried return, they can't even comment on what happened. Yeah, while it was pretty crazy, All the other students basically just went back to practice right away. Archduke candidates are pretty good at concealing their thoughts after all. And 2 days later, before Sylvester arrives for his meeting, they gather ingredients to send back to Ehrenfest for the Lord Hunt, also so she can dump more mana into the gathering spot. When Sylvester arrives, they hold a pre-meeting meeting to get him up to speed, and so he can speak more candidly to his children. Florencia came as well, despite no one really expecting her to, but that's because she was handling the children's reports while Sylvester was busy this winter. They quickly move on to the main topic. Florencia asks if Rosemine thinks they should publicize their info about protections, and she says they should make at least some of the uncontroversial aspects public. If Hersher of all people got actively involved, it's probably a good idea, though any duchy looking to do so will need to improve their relationship with their temple. Now Frembeltag took a step in that direction, but ultimately they're not bragging about it, or even thanking Ehrenfest publicly. As a result, Ehrenfest's reputation isn't improving. When Hersher arrives, they're eating dinner in a private room for this discussion, and the air is kinda tense. But Sylvester says he wants to apologize in person for the trouble that Veronica caused. He wasn't even aware, but Hersher replies that he's already apologized by letter, and he wants to pick up financial support for her now that Ferdinand's gone, but she refuses. Not because she's refusing their apology, mind you, but that support comes with strings attached, even if Sylvester doesn't mean it to. She's more free without it, and her help in the academy only goes so far as concealing certain problems, like Rosemine for example. But maybe she'll reconsider once Rosemine graduates. Not that she wants to cause problems, but whoever decided to move Stopp Acquisition up really screwed the pooch here, and everyone grimaces because she just openly criticized the king. Ferdinand warned her about that. Jokes aside, Rosemine does have a point. Getting a Stopp before divine protections can lead to mana control issues. Clearly. Now it's not affecting anyone else, but once their proposed research is public, it could become a lot more common. And with that, Hersher says she'll bring it up to the royal family. But if they keep putting this off, the old methods of teaching before Stopps were gotten in their first year will be lost. All those magic tools used for brewing and such, people will forget how to make them. And that sort of transitions them to the main topic at hand, Ehrenfest's reputation. So we know how other duchies view Ehrenfest now. They shot up in the ranks, they have a saint, they have trends and mana. They must not be suffering, right? Well, from Ehrenfest's perspective, as a middle duchy with a population bordering on that of a lower duchy, they're suffering quite a bit. That clash in perspectives comes up on more than a few occasions, as the sovereignty is more used to dealing with greater duchies, so they don't necessarily understand the problems of lesser and middle duchies. Hersher wants them to focus on improving Ehrenfest's relationship with other duchies above all else moving forward, but Raublut's distrust of Ferdinand strikes her as odd. Everyone else asks about Ehrenfest, but he alone asks about Ferdinand and Rosemine, which is weird. They shouldn't even know each other as far as everyone but Rosemine is concerned, but this attitude is indicative that they're surrounded by enemies, and making the way to get more divine protections public will ease tensions. This isn't Hersher saying that, but Anastasia's through her. They need to prove themselves useful to the country, and this'll go a long way towards that. So she suggests they work with Dunkelfelger for joint research on the subject. But why them? Ehrenfest's reputation is so poor, Hersher doubts that people will trust them without a greater duchy's involvement, especially since it's trying to get nobles to go to the temple more. Looking at it plainly, that could be an Ehrenfest plot, but they will need to be careful so their research doesn't get stolen by Dunkelfelger. So they thank Hersher for her advice on this matter, and things seem to have been patched up between her and her home. After Hersher leaves, they continue to hammer out the details among the archducal family. Sylvester doesn't really see why Dunkelfelger has to be their partner, but Rosemine says it makes a ton of sense. Juanchel might be better on paper, that's me dropping some foreshadowing there, but Dunkelfelger regularly gets protections from subordinate gods. Clarissa is also due to be her retainer after marrying Hartmut, and Rosemine's relationship with Hannelore means she'll have a reliable partner. So honestly, they're a perfect fit. Plus, Clarissa is a huge future asset for them, since once she's married, she can help Ehrenfest start moving as an upper-ranked duchy. So they're on board there, but what does Rosemine mean about the uncontroversial aspects of this research? Prayer increases one's odds of getting divine protections. That's the harmless aspect she wants to study with Dunkelfelger by looking at their knights. Now for something that's unique to them so their research can't be stolen, Rosemine has already theorized about filling the magic circle entirely instead of just focusing on your elements. Gundalf told her. Med and lay nobles tend to do that, because they don't have enough mana to fill the whole thing, so they only fill the parts with their elements. That means they won't get protection without putting mana into those parts of the circle. How to combat that? Chug rejuvenation potions while doing the ritual. Then there's the foundational magic prayer they chant, but as it turns out, that's a recent addition, not some age-old tradition. Sylvester's father started that around their second or third year in the academy. So wait, does that mean that Sylvester has subordinate god protections? Turns out he does. The goddess of binding and the god of trials. Yeah, his love of Florencia really did define his school life. As for what Rosemind considers dangerous aspects of her research, she wants to try the ritual in the temple in Ehrenfest to see if those who have come of age can gain new protections. Oh damn, she says she sketched it on her diptych and plans to remake it when she gets home. Okay, research is fine and all, but there is one topic weighing on everyone's mind the most. How did the purge go? Sylvester gets serious and explains that it's finished for now. They've eliminated all those who are sworn to Georgine and acted against their duchy in any meaningful capacity, and those who haven't given their names are under investigation. The headcount of who was executed is fewer than 10, but a ton of nobles are still being detained. So as it stands, 5 students need to swear their names: Matthias, Lorenz, Muriella, Bartold, and Cassandra. The rest should be able to return to their families. Those last 2 names were planning to go to Wilfried and Charlotte respectively, but the first 3 wanted to go to Rosemind. We learned that Guy Gerlach blew himself up almost entirely, so they didn't get to search his memories. However, they're fairly certain that he's dead, since they found his arm and a crest-engraved ring containing his mana. Most of those who were sworn to Veronica put up a little resistance, but they were all captured without issue. Those who were sworn to Georgine, though, pretty much ended up killing themselves, so they didn't get many heads with memories they could still search. As for the rest of the nobles being held, they'll wrap up their investigation this winter. Those who only received light fines will probably even be able to go home. Hartmut made regular reports on the orphanage, so things are going pretty smoothly there too. And the playroom is panning out as they expected. Nikolaus is in there, but Karstedt will talk to him about his options once his mother's punishment has been decided. As Karstedt elaborates on the memories they were able to search, he says they were all distorted beyond use, which is odd. Like they were all mixed up and sounds were hard to understand. Can someone actually do that, like, intentionally? Well, yeah, a scholar specializing in drugs says it sounds like the effects of one called Trug. Matthias's detail about the fireplace in the summer and the sweet smell back that up. It's a hallucinogenic plant that distorts memories. Also, it doesn't grow in Ehrenfest. Yeah, Georgine is always prepared. It sounds like they're a step behind her here, but Charlotte puts it into perspective. They still eliminated the threat, made it so Georgine can't act as she pleases in Ehrenfest. This wasn't a waste. It's worth pointing out just how far in advance Georgine prepares, and Guy Gerlach was about as cautious as her. So how did he just let himself die? That wasn't part of his plan, right? Pay attention to some details later on for some actual answers. With that, Ehrenfest is finally safe for Rosemind, and while they'll suffer a mana shortage for a while due to executing 3 Giebs, Rosemind's also overflowing with mana right now, so that'll help out a ton. He then offers some advice that he gave Ferdinand back when he was struggling to control his mana: decompress some and expel it into phase stones. Basically, she's overdoing it with her compression, which he just so happened to bring a huge bag full of phase stones for her to fill for him. Hooray. So when their meeting comes to a close, she does just that. Now, it was too packed in there for her to tell Sylvester about Roderick's protections and the whole name-sworn thing, but all the people she's about to get his name sworn have already finished their ritual, so it can probably wait. As she fills the stones though, she feels her body getting lighter and instinctively realizes this is the limit of her stop. As it turns out, she was past it. That's why she couldn't control her mana. Wait, didn't she get hers from like the literal base of that tree? Hard to imagine there's a higher quality stop than that, right? Yeah, keep that in the back of your mind, because a few details about how this country is run will make you question how the hell a king can keep up if Rosemind's hitting the limit of her stop already. After breakfast, they gather all the students together and go over the purge results. Most are relieved they don't have to give their names, but it's explained that the younger ones are living in the orphanage and the castle dorm until their punishments are decided and carried out. Labor or fines are most likely for those who weren't executed, and the kids can actually go home after those are served. Matthias and Lorenz approach after the announcement and tell Rosemind they've already prepared their stones and are ready to offer them whenever she wants to summon them. Well, the sooner the better, so why not now? And that's about all it takes, as they pile into a room and the ceremony goes off without a hitch. They're officially Rosemind's retainers now. After that's settled, Muriella mentions how she wishes to make her stone too, but she lacks the materials. And that's when Matthias says they're planning to go gather ingredients that Earth Day to help those who need to make theirs still. He knows a method to obtain high quality ingredients without something like, I don't know, a Ternesby fallen? Sounds good, so Rosemind gives her permission, but what about Gresha? She doesn't have to give her name, so Rosemine wanted to ask if she's still willing to serve her, but her guards flat out tell her no. The purge might be done, but she's still a member of the former Veronica faction, so she's gonna have to give her name in order to enter her service. That hasn't changed. Well, damn. Well, she would suffer as a result, so really there's no budging. With that out of the way, she heads to her Archduke candidate lesson. She had a ton of crap, and Wilfried helped her carry it in, but once inside, Hannelore drops a bombshell. Schwartz and Weiss called her Milady, meaning she's now their master. Has Rosemine not been supplying them? Well, no, because she was told the new librarian needed to take ownership and not to visit. Did no one relay that to Hannelore? Well, apparently not. Now there's a crisis if Hannelore accidentally went against the royal family. When Eglantine comes in, they explain the situation, and she's not really that bothered. The library had a breakdown in communication, so it's their fault, not Hannelore's. But Rosemine's more concerned that Hortensia is not prioritizing Schwartz and Weiss. Either way, Eglantine's gonna handle it. The library last part was mostly treated as a dumping ground for books, old research, and study guides to help out students, but this part we see how vital it is to the royal family. Hortensia was tossed into the thick of this, and she's got her own agenda, besides filling magic tools. We'll discover what that entails as the next 4 books play out. Well, since Hannelore is right there, might as well probe her about this old joint research. Eglantine and her are confused why Dunkelfelger of all places, but Rosemine explains their reasoning, but also hinting that Anastasia is pushed for this too, and that seems to do the trick, though they don't really need a reply right now since this is a pretty big deal. Ask their Rob for permission, because they're gonna need to learn about Dunkelfelger's traditions to solve this mystery about divine protections, and Hannelore says she'll do just that. Surely this won't spiral into a complete mess and just a ton more ditter, right? Well, it's finally time for class to begin, and Eglantine looks over Rosemine's blueprints for her city. Yeah, it's a goddamn library, basically. While it's not exactly practical, Eglantine just kinda rolls with it, and takes Rosemine into the back room of the class to learn the God of Darkness and Goddess of Light's names. Now, she said teach originally, but it's more of a revelation. On the floor is a magic circle, and she explains that the Supreme God's names aren't fixed. Each person has their own name for them, and if they share it with others, bad things happen. A scholar tried to learn them long ago to do research, but when he convinced an Archduke candidate to tell him, the scholar was devoured by gold flames and darkness and vanished without a trace, while the candidate, on the other hand, lost their light and darkness protections, on top of no longer being able to use their names and spells. After that, they were demoted down to Archnoble. So whatever happens, don't let anybody hear these names. Got it? Okay, so remember all the way back in part 3 when Ferdinand executed the mayor of Haas? He had Rosemine step away so she couldn't hear him cast the spell. At the time we had assumed it was just because it was a super secret spell, but now we know. If she had heard the names of the supreme gods invoked, it would have killed her. Yeah, there's some really solid world building throughout this whole story. So Rosemine channels her mana into the circle after Eglantine leaves, and the names of the gods are literally burned into her mind. Yeah, she's definitely not gonna forget them. Rosemine's personalized name for the God of Darkness is Shikzarekt, and the Goddess of Lights is Verschpereti. She recites the usual prayer, but with their names inserted in it, and it makes her Stab appear. Gold flames and darkness get sucked into her Stab, filling her with the mana she put into the circle, but then it's fired out and disappears. What the hell? So she collapses on the ground and has to chug a potion just to move. Eglantine is worried from the other side of the door, but she says she's fine. Wilfried comes up next and asks if she's cool, and she says she is. So he shrugs it off. This is business as usual for him. After a bit, when she can finally move, that's when she exits. Most people would probably call it quits there, but Rosemine's not most people. She charges through with the rest of the class. This is the final test for her 3rd year Archduke candidate class, and it's to make her blueprints with Entwinkelm. So she does it since she learned this from Ferdinand, and it's finished. They practice adding a border gate, and Eglantine mentions that the duchy ones usually stay open, but the country ones are usually closed. Ehrenfest actually has one, but you'll also know, Rosemine hasn't been yet. She'll see it when she visits Kernberger this spring. So with that, she's completed her Archduke candidate class. Eglantine wants to invite her to a tea party now that she's done, but Rosemine declines. She still has her Scholar Course classes to take yet. That should serve as an excuse for a few weeks to put off a tea party with a royal. It feels like a million things have happened, and we're only halfway through this book. Crazy, right? Now she's missed the first classes for the Scholar course, and that means she needs to schedule makeup exams, so she just has to fire off a ton of ordinances and schedule them. It's at the professor's discretion when and if they even do them, but most are pretty cool with it. Gundalf is the first to reply, so Rosemine schedules it and heads on over to his lab to knock out 3 classes. Inside, Gundalf is pretty excited to talk with her because word is flying about their joint research with Dunkelfelger. He thinks they need to be doing it with Juanchel first, but Rosemine explains they're not really a good fit due to their lacking divine protections. If they were doing magic tool research, sure, working with Juanchel would make a ton of sense, thus raising the question of, why not just do research with them too? She would, but she's already joining Hersher's lab, even if she's underfunded compared to Gundalf. But since Rosemine doesn't back down here, Gundalf actually takes the hint. However, she is definitely interested in magic tools, so she would love to work with Juanchel later on their magic tool paper. Now that gets Gundalf interested again. They could do that this year even. But she says she's much too busy with her research already, and that's when Gundalf lets her in on a little secret. She's an Archduke candidate, so she shouldn't be doing the actual research, she should be delegating responsibility. Well, she sold on the idea, and after passing her 3 classes with flying colors, she reports back to Wilfried and Charlotte. They're confused why she's going on a rampage suddenly, but Rosemine lays it out. This is a great opportunity. Charlotte and Wilfried are already helping with printing, so just put their scholars in charge. If they refuse, the former Veronica faction children headed by Muriella can do this work, since they're going to need some achievements to not be shunned back home. But after asking their scholars, Ignaz and Marianne are open to using this for their research project. Now they just need to help Bartold and Cassandra get their stones in order so they can assist. But with that settled, Judith tells Rosemine something shocking. Gresha wishes to go as well so she can give Rosemine her name. Well, guess they're gonna have to have a private talk about that. Remember how she wanted a guardian? Well, we're about to see some interesting parallels to Rosemine's experience. So in a meeting room with just her guard knights to keep her safe, Gresha hands Rosemine a sound blocking magic tool because this is pretty private information about her family circumstances. Turns out Gresha's wanted to swear her name to Rosemine for a while. Her family being executed would have been the perfect excuse to put on a sad face while secretly getting what she always wanted, an escape. But then her stupid family had to go and not do anything serious enough to warrant getting executed, so now Gresha has to show some guts and leave them on her own volition. Why does she want to though? Well, she's mistreated quite a bit. Turns out Gresha was born in the temple to a blue shrine maiden and blue priest who fell in love. But when the shrine maiden got pregnant, she tried to convince the priest to return home with her, get married, and live a normal life. That was shot down by the family as asking beyond her station. Blue priests aren't nobles. She ended up being called home anyway. Not for anything good. There she was locked in a side building and essentially lost everything. Her daughter was Gresha, but when the mana shortage hit after the Civil War, the family decided to measure Gresha's mana on a whim, and it turned out she had enough to be a med noble. Originally she was just going to be a servant, but her uncle had her baptized as his daughter. The issue is, she isn't being treated well as his daughter, unlike how Rosemine is by Sylvester. She's just going to eventually be a tool for a politically advantageous marriage. Her so-called brothers call her Temple Girl, and she's made fun of for her big chest. Now that her family is due to be criminals, she can't imagine even a political marriage will help her escape suffering. She knows they're just gonna pawn her off on anyone they can. So Gresha wants out, and knowing how well Rosemine treats her retainers, she's willing to do whatever Rosemine says. So Rosemine gives her answer. She was already resolved to accept her name in the first place, so this changes nothing. Yeah, this is our first time finding somebody else who laundered their backstory through a baptism. And as I pointed out, there's a few parallels here. All Gresha offered her family was mana and use as a bride. Rosemine's extremely lucky that she found people who actually care about her. This is another stark reminder of just how bad things could have been. With Gresha due to join her service, Matthias goes over his gathering strategy, and it's actually inspired by Rosemine's first-year dinner play that secured their victory. He explains what the kids need to do while Rosemine and Charlotte figure out lunch plans and guard nights. The first years have to stay behind. They don't know how to make their high beast yet, though Theodore gets to go along because he's the only one who knows how. Rosemine's going per Leonore's instruction because, well, they can use her shield to protect those gathering ingredients, so when they go out to gather, Rosemine spends a good amount of time reading in her high beast, idly thinking about how she can actually grow now that she's not compressing her mana as much. because it was mentioned forever ago that excess mana tends to stunt growth. Well, back to classes. Rosamine still needs to polish off the last of her scholar classes, and unfortunately, the professor standing in the way of that is Frau Larm. She's not responding to Rosamine's request for a makeup exam, and now she's starting to get desperate to finish. She won't be first in class if she has to wait until the end of the semester to take the exam. Well, time to use her trump card then. She informs Hersher that she can't come to her lab until she finishes her classes, and Frau Larm's preventing that. While she awaits the response, she chats with the scholars and her siblings about their Juanchal research. She's planning to take a step back and let them mostly handle it by themselves. Why? Because while they know printing, Rosamine knows how the sauce is made. Gundolf could pump her for information, and she usually lets that slip pretty freely. If he grills the scholars though, they literally can't answer because they don't know the first thing about how it's made. Pretty smart. Hopefully that doesn't backfire. What Rosamine wishes to accomplish is discovering some uses for their Fey paper from Ilgner. The FM paper probably has some use related to sound, so that needs research for sure. And it's doubtful Juanchal could really figure out too much, since they would never guess that the paper they assume is a magic tool is actually made by commoners. Though to be fair, Charlotte and Wilfried want her to ask for permission before she starts, since this deals with Ehrenfest's new principal industry, but word quickly comes back granting that request. Effin' paper's been simmering on the back burner for a while now, so hey, we're finally getting some actual progress on what they can do with it with this research. Rosamine gets a message from Frau Larm looking to schedule her makeup exams. Great, maybe they misjudged her. However, right after she sets a day, Hersher sends an ordinance saying she put a bug in Frau Larm's ear and manipulated her on how Arnsbach isn't doing research with Ehrenfest, despite their supposed close ties after Ferdinand's marriage announcement, but she tells Rosamine to find an excuse to summon her there for the grading, so Frau Larm doesn't pull any tricks. Never mind, she totally read this bitch right, and Hersher keeps saving her ass this year. Though the only reason this research is such a big topic is because Gundolf and Raufin are running their mouths. Is it really such a big deal? Well, yeah. It's bound to get universally praised, and many duchies are begging Hersher and Gundolf to join. Luckily, they're both doing wonders of filtering them out. So, time for her makeup exams. And Frau Larm's lab is exceedingly clean. For once, most others are a mess, as expected of someone specializing in the gathering and controlling of information, but she tries to launch right into the research, where Rosamine stops her and expertly maneuvers her onto the exam. She takes the last of her tests, and before Frau Larm starts grading, Rosamine summons Hersher to the lab. Why though? She doesn't need to be there. But since this is joint research and she plans to use Rymunds as the basis for their collaboration per Hersher's suggestion, he's in her lab, Rosamine's joining her, and Ferdinand's their teacher. So Hersher being there for this discussion just sorta works out. That way they can hammer out the details. And when she arrives, they successfully maneuver Frau Larm into grading the test right then and there, because they weren't going to have this discussion until she had her grades, successfully manipulating her before she knew what was up. Doesn't she specialize in this sort of stuff? Apparently she's kinda bad at it. As she grades, she goes wide-eyed, and Hersher looks on pretty confused. Yeah, as it turns out, Frau Larm accidentally, in massive air quotes, gave Rosamine the 5th year exam. Is she gonna have to retake it? No, because she still got perfect marks. Ferdinand's teaching methods are absolutely terrifying. He taught her everything in a single go without breaking it down by course or year. Her education level is literally at that of a graduate. Okay, blowing past that absurdity, they get down to research and lay it out. Her and Raimund doing the research, Ferdinand is the grader, and they'll use Frau Larm for communication, giving her control. Bam, done. And Frau Larm accepts those terms. So, Arnsbach is now the 3rd grader duchy to work with Ehrenfest. But as Rosamine goes to leave, she makes a comment about how her health is doing, hinting that she might possibly know about the whole poisoning attempt over fall. And Rosamine gives her a very non-committal answer about how her health is sorta getting worse. I mean, it's not entirely wrong, she is having trouble controlling her mana. Now that her classes are finally done, she can blast through sending out all these tea party invites and get to work in Hersher's lab. Awesome. Dunkelfelger hasn't received word from their OB about their research yet, so they're gonna hold off on that. That way they can knock out all their business in one go. And with that, she has Lisa Letta prepare food and cleaning gear for their trip to the lab tomorrow, while she retires to her hidden room to write letters for Ferdinand, using the invisible ink that he gave her. She details what the hell has been happening this year and asks some questions about divine protections. Once it's dry, she writes a letter in normal ink to cover it up, and then writes one through Frau Larm. adding a small note in invisible ink asking if he got it. The next day, she goes to the lab with Theodore and Matthias as her guards, and it smells pretty bad in the Scholar building, but Theodore will get used to it once he starts brewing potions for himself. Lieseletta cleans the lab when they get there, annoying Hersher because she didn't tidy up at all, but inside, Rosemine notices that Raimund isn't there yet. Damn, guess she'll just have to kill some time. And that she does, by organizing all the documents Hersher isn't using. Turns out she has a bookshelf in her room, and as Rosemine goes through the documents, she actually discovers some from Ferdinand. One is on the 20 mysteries of the Academy, and with it is a map that has some locations marked on it. That's pretty interesting, but there's no conclusion. Hersher states that Ferdinand never finishes research he doesn't intend to publish. When he gets the answer he's looking for, he just stops writing. Hell, he's even destroyed evidence of some of the conclusions he's reached before. Usually that's only on research he's deemed dangerous. The points she's seeing on this map are something that's gonna come up later this part. Yeah, even something as minor as this plays a role. Just then, Raimund enters the lab, does a massive double take, and then he comes back and enters. For real. He explains that he was summoned by Det Lind and Frau Larm the previous day about a research project, but as it turns out, that wasn't a mistake. Now that he knows that Rosemine will do the brewing while he does the designing, it seems a bit more manageable, though he's not an idiot. Relying on an Archduke candidate for brewing seems pretty presumptuous and kinda backwards. However, this will help Ferdinand in the long run, so might as well go for it, right? After their discussion, Raimund has another class, so he's gotta leave, which means Rosemine's left in the lab to do the brewing while he's out. And when he returns, he can only cry in his hands because of just how many prototypes she was able to make when he was gone. It usually takes him like more than a day just to create one, so her doing 4 in a few hours is frustrating, but that's also just the amount of mana she's working with. He can't compare. Raimund will take them to Ferdinand to grade, but she also hands him her letter to pass off as well. Too bad, rather than a response from Ferdinand the next day, she receives a tea party invite from Eglantine. Well, Eglantine's a royal, so she can't refuse. It's at Eglantine's villa, so Anastasius is due to be there as well, but also Hannelore, Hildebrand, and the librarians. Yeah, this is their Bookworm tea party, which, hey, that means books from the palace library. Hell yeah. So when it's time to go, she shows up, but it's just her, Eglantine, and Anastasius. Where's everyone else? Yeah, turns out they summoned her early to talk about a few things in private, like why is she suddenly starting 3 research projects with different greater duchies? That sort of thing. But Ehrenfest didn't really have a choice now, did they? Dunkelfelger's is by Anastasius' recommendation, Druanschel couldn't be refused due to their status, and Arnsbach's was a bargaining chip to pass Frau Larm's class. Besides, she was already working on this stuff with Raimund, and if you recall from the Interduchy tournament last year, she did promise to wow Anastasius with their research this year. They ask if she plans on doing something with Klausenberg as well, but she would rather not. They're already stretched to their limit currently. And again, they warn her about having her research stolen if she's not careful. Well, this has been brought up a few times now, so surely it's not foreshadowing. But that also wasn't why she was summoned. No, Anastasius finally confronts her, saying she's the one who blessed him and Eglantine during their graduation. That caused a ton of problems, as it energized his retainers to push for him to be king again. But after getting them settled down and a lot of sleepless nights, they came to a conclusion. Sigiswald's Starbind to Adolfina would definitely benefit from a real blessing. So thus they're asking her to act as the High Bishop for the ceremony. Now she doesn't want to, obviously, but this is a personal request from the royal family. Remember that Ehrenfest needs to start playing ball, per Ferdinand, so do they really have a choice? After 9 whole books hearing about the royal family, we're finally getting to the core of their issue here. They want to put an end to all this bickering about the king. Sigiswald might not have a Grutrusite, but her blessing would at least give him some legitimacy. The second prince died after inheriting the Grutrusite and right before his coronation. After his death, it was lost. Nobody could find it, and they've looked everywhere. The current king and his family are racing around the sovereignty, pouring mana into this country to keep it going. But that doesn't change the fact that he lacks a Grutrusite. And without it, even the king can't use spells for running the country. Basically, they're just keeping the status quo going. And as we'll find out, it's a losing battle. So they want the Saint of Ehrenfest to bolster Sigiswald's claim to the throne and settle this argument. Well, she might not care about Sigiswald any, but she would get to do Ferdinand's Starbind if she goes. So Rosemine says to get Sylvester, the king, and the Sovereign High Bishop's permission for her to perform the ceremony. Also, she's gonna need her guard knights there too. She's gonna need to stay safe, and that's a pretty good sign for them. Looks like they gotta send some requests. Hannelore comes in right after, apologizing fiercely for taking ownership of the tools, but Anastasius puts her at ease, saying that's not why they called her. Rather, Anastasius summoned the library committee to ask for their assistance, and to secure that, he brought a book from the palace library. Yeah, Ferdinand called that, so she accepts without thinking, and that leads to the topic for both Rosamine and Hannelore. They want their help, finally entering the forbidden archive that Hildebrand told them about. Framed with that discussion earlier, Rosamine gets the picture pretty quick. They think the Grutrishite, or at least how to obtain it, is located in that archive. Well, she can't refuse, so she has to accept. This is a nice little detail I've really come to appreciate in hindsight. Everyone has screamed at Rosamine to avoid the royal family since her first year in the academy, and due to her circumstances, or just plain meddling, she hasn't. She's now officially crossed the event horizon and there's no going back. Why was everyone so worried? We'll find out in about 4 volumes, but understand it wasn't because they're a middle and neutral duchy. Their fears were entirely founded, and it starts now. Once the librarians and Hildebrand arrive, the tea party can actually begin. Hortensia starts by apologizing, not just for the trouble with Schwartz and Weiss, but also about how she had treated Rosamine during their initial meeting, as someone suspicious. Hildebrand came back with word of an Archduke candidate, probing him about an archive that only royalty can enter, and when Raublut went to investigate that rumor, he saw Rosamine at the library with a diary containing information about it. Basically, it led them to believe that Ehrenfest was trying to steal from the royal family. Well, that was a stroke of bad luck, honestly. Rosamine can't really begrudge the guy for doing his job, but it really is unfortunate. Hortensia has taken ownership of Schwartz and Weiss again, and after Rosamine asks how Hannelore even took ownership, Hortensia explains. They had plenty of mana, and other tools required her immediate attention. The forbidden archive they want to access can only be opened with the keys held by the 3 archnoble librarians. Hortensia's job was to take ownership of those keys, but as it turns out, only one person can own a single key. When she tried to take ownership of a second, the first one became unregistered. Enter Hannelore and Rosamine to fill in those gaps. Anastasius wants them to open the archive using the keys with Hortensia. Sounds good. I mean, they can't refuse anyway, but Rosamine wants to know if she can read the stuff inside. Yeah, Anastasia shoots her down pretty quick, saying it'll be for the librarians to look over. Well, maybe she could read what's deemed okay afterwards. Yeah, sure, he doesn't care. With that business out of the way, they move on to talking about books. The topic of romance leads Hildebrand wishing to present a face stone to the woman he loves, like he read in those night stories. But just then, everyone kinda picks up on the subtle cue there, and they start wishing him congratulations on his engagement. Rosamine notes he seems conflicted about it, but chalks it up to his youth. Eglantine then mentions Rosamine's hair stick this year, assuming it's from her fiancé, but she goes into the cover story. Also to boost Ehrenfest's reputation a bit by saying they treat her well. Then they go on to the book exchange where Rosamine hands out copies of the Royal Academy love stories to Hortensia, Solange, Hannelore, and Eglantine, while Hildebrand and Anastasius get copies of a Ditter story. With multiple copies out, Eglantine quickly realizes these are actually the same book. Not just transcriptions of it, but literally the same book, which is where Rosamine unveils printing as Ehrenfest's new industry. Anastasius thinks the lacking covers and low page count exude poverty, but she explains it's to keep costs down for lay and med nobles, while allowing people to add their own covers. Though the last book she hands out is a copy of The Story of Fernestein, a gender-swapped book about Ferdinand's tragic life written by Elvira to mourn his departure. The worst part about gender-swapping Ferdinand is his similarities to Rosamine really stand out. Surely we won't be the only people to notice. After the Bookworm tea party, Rosamine races to her hidden room to write Ferdinand for advice about everything that just happened, because the royal family just dropped a ton on her plate. And the next day, she's already got a tea party request from Dunkelfelger waiting. It's not just with Hannelore either. Lestalot is participating too, so they're requesting that Wilfried join. Though he's fine doing so since he suffered through enough girls' tea parties in his first year. At the event itself, things are pretty businesslike because they have a ton of topics to cover. The first one is Lestalot's hairpin order, which he's super excited to receive. So when he examines it, he says it's not bad. And Hannelore has to play the interpreter, saying he means there's nothing to criticize. Yeah, Rosamine's kinda noticed at this point. Lestalot generally hides his anxiety and excitement with annoyance. Now that she's cracked that code, Lestalot's a lot easier to read. From there, they go on to the joint research. Rosamine explains their hypothesis, so they want to ask the knights about the rituals they perform, their grades, as well as their status. That way they can see if there's any correlation between those. Well, good thing their Ob gave permission. But there are 2 conditions to seeing the ritual. Ehrenfest is gonna have to play Ditter. Wait, really? Well, yeah. The ritual their Archduke candidates perform is done after a game of Ditter to thank the gods. The second condition is Ehrenfest must show them one of their rituals. Fair enough, but which one? They can't exactly do Spring Prayer or one of the milestone ceremonies, and filling their gathering spot with mana is kind of off the table. Rosemine doesn't know if she's technically allowed to do that, but they accept Dunkelfelger's terms for the research. Though Lestalot is wondering why Clarissa, of all people, was chosen for spearheading this effort on their end. Obviously because of her connection to Ehrenfest, and they know she'll take this seriously because her fiancé is Hartmut, their high priest. A stir runs through Dunkelfelger, wondering what Hartmut did to warrant that treatment, but Rosemine explains that going to their temple in their duchy isn't a bad thing. I mean, she doesn't know what it's like in Dunkelfelger, but in Ehrenfest it's fine. Hell, Ferdinand was their high priest before he left, so Hartmut was a pretty obvious pick to fill the role. Besides, Ehrenfest has very few blue robes, so Wilfried explains that he and his siblings are helping with Spring Prayer to keep the harvest up. So eyes turn to Clarissa then. Will she cancel the engagement? Hell no. She would have fought him for the job herself had she been in Ehrenfest. Clarissa pumps herself up and starts going on a rant, and this doesn't usually wrap up soon. Celestalot asks Rosemine to stop her since she's already her retainer at heart. That sounds like a pain. Rosemine gives her Hartmut's hairpin as a gift and tells her to stand in the corner and chillax while they finish their talk. And that actually works. Apparently the students in Dunkelfelger can't get her to stop once she starts. So now they can move on to their last topic, their history book. It still needs the Ob's final approval before they can publish it, but the first volume is ready for review. Apparently her translation has sparked a new wave of pride in their duchy, since most nobles don't tend to learn about their duchy's history. Archduke candidates do, as we know, but the average noble doesn't really need to know the whole history of their duchy. Yeah, they have that book, but it was so archaic, no one really understood it. Now it's accessible and people love it. Hell, even Hildebrand's mother loved it since she's from Dunkelfelger. And then Lestalot praises Wilma's art in the book. That's her personal artist, so Rosemine thanks him, which makes Lestalot curious if her artist draws pictures of Rosemine herself. She can't really say she's seen any since, well, she's only been into Wilma's room once. So, maybe. Well, now would be a good chance to get his thoughts as a Ditter enthusiast on Roderick's book. So she lets him borrow a copy of a Ditter story, and every knight in the room is stoked. Though as Lestalot flips through the pages, he notes there's no artwork inside. What the hell? Yeah, Rosemine's artist is a commoner, so she can't really draw things from the academy. That makes sense, but art is necessary for a book like this. It'd be a shame if it didn't have it. But who's willing to draw it for her? No clue. Look no further, because Lestalot is offering his services. Wilfried is against asking an Archduke candidate, let alone one from a greater duchy, to take on the work usually done by a lay noble. But Lestalot clearly really wants to do this. Well, maybe after they see his work first. That's when Hannelore switches gears, while Wilfried and Lestalot talk about a Ditter story for which scenes would work best for an illustration. We get some info on the poetry from the Royal Academy stories where Rosemine gets a better understanding of it through Hannelore's interpretations. But eventually it switches to her asking Rosemine if she's the inspiration for Fernestein in the latest book. Now she denies it, of course, but apparently the similarities are striking. Hannelore and even Lestalot are worried she's being mistreated. Better nip this in the bud. She tries to explain it away by saying she knows who it's based on, but Wilfried botches this by saying he had no clue it was based on a real person. What a dolt. But they quickly get in sync and deny the claim is based on Rosemine, because she's being treated pretty well back home. Now she's just hoping the next volume comes out soon. Yeah, it's too late. The rumors are already flying, and we'll see this blow up next volume. Hell, we'll even see hints in the epilogue. Back in the dorm, Rosemine fell sick from overexerting herself and spent some time reading the book Solange lent her this year from the Closed Stack archive, which has research on Schwartz and Weiss that Ferdinand didn't see. Apparently it contains a lot about the life element they didn't notice, so maybe if they combine this with Ferdinand's research, they might actually hit a breakthrough. She wants to write him asking about it, but Lieseletta won't let her out of bed, even if she could make cute shoemills. After she's a bit better, she heads down to talk to Roderick for a report. The paper came through with their research for Juanchel, along with praise for letting Charlotte and Wilfried's retainers handle it. Also, they would like for her to do a long-distance blessing for the Princess Starbine, but that's not happening. She's only ever done those by accident before, and it could bring up a whole host of other issues she would rather avoid. Doing the ceremony is their safest bet. She also adds to get the latest volume of Fernestein to the Academy as soon as it's done. Lending that out will help clear up the rumors. A day after that, Muriella and Gresha give her their name-swearing stones. And that's that. She's finally filled out her retainers. Muriella is super excited to start working on stories or gathering them or hell, just talking about them at tea parties. But Rosemine flatly tells her to not take Felina's job and instead focus on learning about the printing industry because she'll be working under Elvira after she comes of age. Gresha works with Lisaletta to get up to speed on what she'll need to do to serve her lady, because even though she won't be handling negotiations with greater duchies, she will still need to be there to work in the shadows to support Rosemine. After that, she heads to the lab and finally gets her responses from Ferdinand. Yeah, Raimund came through, and also they got passing marks on their prototype. Awesome, but gives him her next letter for Ferdinand before leaving. Immediately she races into her hidden room to see some very scathing letters coming back to her. Well, she sort of expected this, but he answers her questions throughout the book thus far. His advice about her rampaging mana is the same as Sylvester's. Don't tell Hersher about what she saw at the top of the altar, and pretty much spoiling her Dunkelfelger research by saying he gained divine protections after coming of age and entering the temple. He did this experiment already, but overall there's a sort of wistfulness in these letters, where Ferdinand drops hints about wishing he could return to Ehrenfest to do research. Yeah, it's pretty sad. The second letter confirms that Frau Larm isn't doing her job and getting him reports, but he tells her to ensure that Hartmut is there at Sigiswald Starbind, and to not bless his because it would only cause more suspicion. As for the hidden archive, Ferdinand drops some massive bombshells. Only royalty, archdukes, archduke candidates registered to their foundations for mana replenishment, and the library's magic tools can enter. The librarians won't actually be able to go in. The fact that the royal family doesn't know this shows someone might actually be withholding information from them, and he urges Rosemine to inform them of this. That archive contains information that present and future kings must know. He tells Rosemine not to go in no matter what, as that's only going to cause more problems. The last little bit of his hidden letter, though, says that an envoy from Lanzanov has arrived. They're inquiring about bringing a new princess to the Adelgisa villa, so falls to Ferdinand to ask the king what he wishes to do. Yeah, it's pretty sad Ferdinand has to handle this considering his past. He's literally forced to doom a woman and the majority of her children to death. Why this plays out that way is a pretty big spoiler for the end of the series, so I'm not going to get into that yet, but the fact that it's dropped here is groundwork for the climax. When Rosemine exits her hidden room, she sends out 3 ordinances, one to Hildebrand, Eglantine, and the library. She explains that the librarians can't go in the hidden archive, only royals and archduke candidates, and inside are documents the royal family would benefit from reading. And the response comes back from Anastasius, saying come to his villa in 3 days. The epilogue picks up from Lestalot's perspective. He's drawing the illustrations he promised Rosemine in the dorm while overseeing the students. They're all fighting over who gets to read a Ditter story next, and he's fairly annoyed by it, mostly because he would rather be in his room focusing on a different illustration, but as an archduke candidate, he has to be present in the common room to mediate these situations, at least until Hannelore arrives for her shift. As he and his retainers chat about Ehrenfest in the book, one thing strikes Lestalot, and that's just how keen the women of his duchy are. They picked out how special Rosemine was right away, and his retainers agree that Rosemine is in fact special. She's the one who clearly held the negotiating power with the illustrations, not Wilfried, who's supposed to be the next Ob, and apparently she was the one who did the talks with Ob Dunkelfelger last year. That raises the question, is printing really a duchy industry, or is Ehrenfest just using Rosemine's interest for profit? The story of Fernestein seems to hint the latter, if the similarities are to be believed, and they do, because Rosemine knew who it was based on, but Wilfried didn't. When Hannelore gets back, Lestalot takes his leave to his room. Inside he's working on a painting specifically a picture of Rosemine during her whirl that year, where she was literally glowing. That's why he took such an interest in Wilma's illustrations of her. And this painting isn't exactly a secret, but it's definitely not out of romance, or so he says, but out of a fascination with the sheer beauty of the scene. I mean, she can't even sense mana after all. Why would he be romantically interested in her? As he hits a stopping point, his retainers ask him what he plans to do. Rosemine is clearly first wife of a greater duchy material, to which Lestalot agrees. In fact, he wishes he had more time to get to know Rosemine and improve his relationship with her, so perhaps bride taking Ditter is their best bet. But without her consent, that'd just be bride stealing Ditter. Either way, they need to act, and they're choosing to do so without Hannelore's knowledge because it'll be annoying if she finds out. If Dunkelfelger doesn't act, the royal family's gonna take Rosemine. It's only a matter of time before they realize her value. Wow, that was some ominous foreshadowing. The Forbidden Archive, all this research, and bride stealing Ditter. Rosemine's facing a hell of a 3rd year. That's on top of everything that's already happened. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we got side stories to take care of. First up is fantasy versus reality from Muriella's perspective. She's reading in the common room, and we come to understand why she loves romance stories so much. They serve as an escape from the harsh reality of her life. She and Bartold are childhood friends, and he was a potential marriage partner for her. But after their families are executed, there's little chance of that happening. Besides, he's bugging her to give her name to Wilfried instead of Rosemine, but that's not the path she wants to take. Bartold is really loyal to Veronica, but the odds that Wilfried is going to keep respecting her as time goes on is non-existent. Things are definitely going to change. However, this does serve as some foreshadowing for Bartold's motivations later on. The night Sylvester visited the dorm, he calls all the kids whose parents were executed to inform them of what happened. Everyone pretty much saw this coming, they knew who their parents were sworn to. Except at the end, he has Muriella stay behind. That's weird, she assumed it would be Matthias. But Sylvester explains she has to swear her name not because of her mother who was sworn to Georgine. As it turns out, she was caring for her younger brother and hadn't really been involved in Gerlach's schemes. The family was going to get off. However, with her death, her father refused to claim her as his daughter. She's actually the blood daughter of a different Geeb and first wife who are guilty here, and given to her baptismal mother and father because they couldn't conceive at the time. But when they did, her treatment changed quickly, so now that she's being returned to her old family, she has to swear her name. Yeah, that sucks, because this is really not her fault. But as a consolation, Sylvester says she can switch to serving Elvira after she comes of age because this was a super unfortunate set of circumstances. Muriella kind of expected her family situation to play out like this, so she's not really surprised, but she still thanks the offer as consideration. The next day, they all plan to greet Rosemine, but Roderick meets them first to give him some key advice. Rosemine doesn't care about status. He relays the story of Traugot, how Damiel leads her knights in Ehrenfest, and even the opinions of commoners are held to a higher standard than that of nobles. If they choose not to interact with commoners, Rosemine won't scold them for it, but it will impact their work, as it did with Roderick during the poisoning incident in Fall. So in essence, he tells them to throw out common sense. After she's name sworn though, she tries to chat up Rosemine's other retainers about the love stories she enjoys. But it doesn't go as expected. The attendants are well versed, but only to keep topics going for discussion. The knights barely care, though Leonore gives her a stern warning about not ending up as a character in a story she enjoys. And the scholars also don't really seem to care much beyond it makes money for Rosemine. That sucks. But Felina asks Muriella to accompany her to meet a friend. It's here Felina introduces Muriella to an arch scholar from Yassenberg named Luarati. She's gathering stories for Rosemine as well, but she's also super passionate about love stories in general. She absolutely adores the Royal Academy love stories. It's here Muriella meets a true friend, and they chat about their favorite scenes until the day ends. And that's all thanks to Felina's connections. Next is finding purpose and the Guardians of Knowledge from Hortensia's perspective. She's been assigned to work in the library with her husband delivering the news. Solange is super happy to meet her again, as they knew each other from Hortensia's time as a student. She signs a contract to start working there after handing over her assignment letter from the king, and things move pretty quickly. Though her true aim is to investigate Rosemine, of course, Solange explains she's been a huge help to the library by just supplying mana, so she's a pretty big fan. As she gets a tour, she sees the terrible state the library is in. The second closed stack archive has rotting documents that should be preserved by a magic tool, but Solange explains she just doesn't have the mana to operate them. Hortensia wonders why she hasn't requested help before, but Solange says that's why she's there, right? Well, no. She's there because she's supposed to investigate Rosemine. However, she doesn't say that. There's a repair tool there that they need to use to fix these documents that are rotting. That actually reminds her of her previous job in the palace library. Turns out Hortensia served the second prince, Waldefried. She usually worked in his villa managing documents, but after his assassination by the first prince, she was taken in by Klausenberg. The previous Ob told her he would introduce her to the third prince after the war, but after he was assassinated too, that changed to the fifth prince. In fact, he's the one who rallied the second and third prince's retainers around the fifth. That's what's formed the basis of his faction. This is also presumably where she met Eglantine since she spent time in Klausenberg. This was a pretty dark time for Hortensia, as she essentially lost her sense of purpose. But Solange assumes her husband's the one who rescued her from that despair. But no, theirs was purely a political marriage and there's zero love there. They married past prime childbearing age as well, since Raublut lost his first love long ago apparently. But then he and the king requested that she take on this job, giving her new purpose once again. so she's pretty pleased. After the handover of the tools, Solange chastises Hortensia for treating Rosemine so poorly, assuming that Raublut told her something about Rosemine, and that's when she finally comes clean. She was sent there to investigate the archive with the 3 keys and see what Rosemine knows. Solange clears the air once and for all. Rosemine didn't pump Hildebrand for that information. It was at a tea party where she mentioned the archive as one of the mysteries at the academy. That was just the topic that happened to be going on, and Rosemine brought it up. It does make sense that those serving the king would focus on that, but Hortensia is a librarian, and Rosemine a student. She shouldn't have the mindset of a guard knight, essentially, so she suggests getting to know Rosemine, rather than treating her as a threat. So now it's Hortensia's turn to ask Solange about the past. What did the royals do when they came to the library before the Civil War? As it turns out, Prince Waldefried was supposed to come visit as well, and Solange unfortunately doesn't really know since she's just a med noble. The arch-librarians would open a door at the back of the second closed stack archive for the royal family, but Solange couldn't go beyond that door because there's a literal status barrier preventing her from going in. You have to be an archnoble to do so, but it's for sure not the rumored archive only royals can enter, as apparently Archduke candidates can go in as well. Now, Solange wasn't trying to hide this information either. She tried many times to get the royal family to visit and sent requests. Hortensia explains that no one would falter. But why didn't the Knights Order get these keys and look inside? Well, they simply couldn't. They're in the Arch-Librarian's chambers and no one can enter. At least not without being an Arch Scholar and having signed a contract to be a Guardian of Knowledge with the Goddess of Wisdom, Mestianora. After the Civil War, swearing loyalty to the new king was pretty damn common. And the Arch-Librarians couldn't do that because, well, they were sworn to Mestianora through contract magic already. Because they couldn't swear their loyalty there, that's why they were executed. Now Hortensia knows her duty. She follows Solange to the statue of Mestianora that Rosemine gave her mana to the previous year, and at the base is a stone slate. It's a place where they write their oath and sign a contract. Hortensia follows Solange's instructions and signs it with her stab. After it's done and her mana is sucked out, rather than gold flames like normal, a key appears, which is weird. Hortensia touches it and it's sucked inside her stab, and with that, she's officially become a Guardian of Knowledge. Wow, we got some interesting information out of these side stories. Not just some information on Wilfrid and his new namesworn, but the Second Prince, the Purge, and the inner workings of the library. These are things that'll impact the story as it goes on, but also impact future character decisions. But before we can even get into that, we gotta wrap this video up. That's all for future installments. Part 5 is where the story really kicks into overdrive. This is, essentially, the slowest book in this part of the story, and there was a ton that still happened. Rosemine got new retainers, the Purge was wrapped up, divine protections are leading to research, deeper involvement with the royal family, more lore about the Grutricite, and a general unease that things are building behind the scenes. One of the most telling aspects is Rosemine might actually be at her most observant in the story to this point, but so many things are playing out in the shadows, she literally couldn't figure them out even if she tried. There's almost zero hints to her, but what I love is how these are all just the tip of the iceberg. As excited as you might be about the reveals this volume, you haven't seen nothing yet. Religious revival plays a huge role in Part 5. Nobody knows the number of divine protections Rosemine received at this point, but they do know one thing. It was a lot. The fact that she's spilling mana out left and right enough to accidentally bless the whole class, fill large, high-quality phase stones with enough mana to glow while just trying to keep hers contained, and filling their gathering spot weekly, only fuels her saint legend further. In Part 4, it was mostly perceived as a useful piece of propaganda by Ironfest, so most disregarded it without much thought. But starting next volume, Rosemine's sainthood stops being a joke. And because of that sainthood that started all the way back in Volume 8 of this story, the ripple turns into a huge religious revival that will take over the whole country, as noble culture at large is forced to face the power their gods can provide, divine protections, mana replenishment, and even a greater sense of purpose. We as readers have taken all this stuff for granted because we're seeing it through Rosemine's eyes, but for the rest of nobility, the gods are just essentially a metaphor. One of the coolest things is seeing these religious ceremonies taken seriously by nobles after they see their power firsthand. Religion and the backstory of this country essentially turn into the Gabrielle lore dumps of this part. as more and more people wake up to the power of religious ceremonies and Rosemine's divinity, as she breaks conventions like it's common sense. Hortensia is an interesting character to introduce at this point in the story. She's a woman with a strong tie to the second prince, who was saved by Klausenberg, is close to Eglantine, married the Knight Commander, and is now in the academy trying to discover the path to the Grucher site for the current royal family. She's a character who has been closely tied to pretty much every major political event and character in recent history, and she works as a good lens for us understanding the bigger picture. Mostly because she's fairly open-minded. She was around for the inciting incident of the Civil War, found herself tugged by its whims, and is deeply rooted with the current king. But despite that, she really is a principled person looking for purpose. And it's in the academy she's found it. By using her position to guide the royal family to the Grucher site, or at least that's what she hopes, one way or another, she's going to be a key figure in solving Jürgen Schmidt's current problem, creating a sort of thread connecting the previous Grucher site owner to the next, which is not just poetic, but also thematically relevant. I hinted at this in the video, but the royal family really has been a fixture in this story for 10 books now. Repeatedly, Rosemine has been told to avoid them at all costs, and due to her own bad luck or just plain meddling, she keeps getting involved. The unfortunate side effect of that is, she's now deeply invested in their struggles, so we as the audience get to hear about them. It all pretty much starts here, as Anastasius was the first royal to mention the embarrassing flaw that's plagued his father's rule. He's a king without a Grucher site. From what we know already, that's like running a duchy without access to the foundational magic. But Rosemine never really appreciated that analogy until she learned the Archduke candidate coursework from Ferdinand, and I guess a little bit in class. And to be honest, it's undersold. As the climax of this story is now on the horizon, we will learn more about the Grucher site and why it's so important. The king not having one and how the royal family is suffering as a result is a huge driving plot point in the first half of this part, as an invisible clock ticks on the kingdom of Jürgen Schmidt, and those living within it are living on borrowed time. And amidst that real struggle, nobles are pushing for Anastasius and Eglantine to take the throne over Sigiswald, Raublut is pushing Hildebrand to find the Grucher site and take the throne for himself, and we still haven't had a proper introduction to the king yet. And I just gotta say, he's the perfect capstone to this whole mess. What do we have in the middle of that delicate political situation? Why, our little gremlin Rosemine, as she bumbles her way into the royal family left and right for the past 2 years. She's undermined the plan to tie Klausenberg to the royal family for stronger political backing, obliterated the relationship with the Sovereign Temple, and has the king's retainers worried that she and Ferdinand are searching for the Grucher site to take the throne away. Not because the royals want the throne that bad for themselves, but because the mere act of one actively searching reflects poorly on the king, and threatens the unstable peace of the country. That was already demonstrated during the last Interduchy tournament with that whole terrorist attack. That Jürgen Schmidt's current situation isn't stable, nor is it sustainable. Ehrenfest, a small, neutral duchy with no strong political ties getting the Grucher site, that would just lead to another civil war. Despite her best efforts, Rosemine is a prime target. So how will she turn all that around? We'll see in the next few volumes. With that, we finished the first volume of Part 5. It's been a long journey, but it only gets crazier from here on out. What awaits Rosemine with all this research on her plate, rumors swirling about her treatment back in Ehrenfest, and now the royal family summoning her about the Forbidden Archive? These are all answers we'll see next time. But for now though, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with the link down in the description, and if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. Speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to JMUN33A, Robin DBL, and Samuel Chen for their continued support. Thanks for watching.